Hello and welcome to the Frans van Kat interview. I'm Annette Young. As the turmoil continues in the wake of the Arab Spring, it appears the world seems to have forgotten about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. With the peace process going nowhere, the border, however, between Israel and Gaza is far from peaceful as Palestinian militants continue to fire rockets into southern Israel, thus prompting a harsh military response from the Israelis. This as 1.7 million Palestinians try to eke out an existence living in Gaza, with the coastal enclave still under an Israeli blockade. In the meantime, Hamas, their Islamist rulers, further entrench their control of the territory. French historian Jean-Pierre Filiu has just published a book in French about the troubled history of this tiny sliver of land. He joins me today in the studio. Jean-Pierre Filiu, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking you, has the world forgotten about Gaza?
No. The whole issue from the historical perspective is that the world attempted many times to forget about Gaza and to trap this enclave and its population in a box and just to think about something else. And every time it came back pretty violently. And I'm afraid we're into this kind of period and it will come back again.
Well, certainly the Middle East peace process is withered to absolutely nothing. It seems that Washington has put up a close for business until further notice sign on its window. It doesn't bode well for those in the region, particularly those living in Gaza, does it?
Well, for them anyway. Life is a long history of misery and different kind of trials. What I explained, described and proved in the book that the very peace process during its golden age from 93 to 96 was very detrimental to the population in Gaza. So there was no feeling that peace, was really bringing a plus in the daily life. On the contrary, that was when the blockade that is now permanent started to be 1 day out of 3, more or less. So I have a very simple proposal. If you want to have a real peace in the Middle East, just start earnestly with Gaza.
And what do you do in order to achieve that?
Well, I think first, accept the fact that Gaza is not living on the margin of history, that you cannot, consider it's over and done and just keep it for the next generation. It's a pressing issue, it's urgent, and so I have 3 tracks that I'm proposing to anybody who would be bold enough to address them. Of course, lift the blockade. That's crucial because Hamas is living on the blockade and it's, fostering its control of the population on the blockade. Then, second, of course, demilitarization. It's impossible to go on with such a proportion of the population of Gaza under arms. And then development, real development, not just aid being, flushed into this country without real growth or investment.
Do you think there's anybody brave enough on the world stage who could do those things?
Well, I think in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, a lot of plans were drawn and they were pretty sensible. There were a lot of people involved. The last person that really tried to address Gaza nearly physically was James Wolfson, when he was, the former head of the World Bank, who became the leader of the Quartet.
And he bought a number of greenhouses before the Israelis withdrew in 2005, but they were destroyed within days of the Israeli troops leaving the territory.
Yes, it's a complex process because the destruction was also part of the fact that the withdrawal was not negotiated, that there was no transfer of authority, that militias occupied the places. But ever since, the whole idea is to keep Gaza under not only blockade but close watch. And imagine that today, most of the international aid that is coming to Gaza is paying the salaries of civil servants of the Palestinian Authority to keep them from working, because they don't want those civil servants to work for the Hamas government. So it's really, quite impossible to build anything on
And it's
that.
actually 5 years ago this month that the Islamist group Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip after a bloody battle with its arch rivals Fatah. Now, in response, the Israelis tightened their economic blockade of the territory and only eased, not lifted it, after that flotilla raid in May 2010. What are conditions like there at the moment?
Well, the issue, is that life is always on the edge. Yeah, that the feeling of weakness or vulnerability is deeply striking at any inhabitant of Gaza. One shouldn't paint too black a picture. We're not talking about a humanitarian crisis, but about 1,700,000 people who cannot project themselves in any kind of future, who are just living on a day-to-day basis. So there's no development, there's no economy, and it's even worse. You have the whole economy of the subterranean economy, of all the tunnels going to Egypt, all the smugglings. And so it's even more damaging anything that could be, built for the future in Gaza.
But it seems like Hamas is entrenching its control over the territory, despite the fact that there's a lot of Gazan people who are not happy with the fact that they're ruling.
That's what they call in Gaza the nightmare inside the nightmare. The big nightmare being Israeli controlling every aspect of life, even after the 2005 withdrawal. Then always some kind of a plane or some kind of monitoring in the air. But the other nightmare is, of course, Hamas, that is building its daily control of the population on the very blockade, because thanks to the blockade, they can monitor everything one citizen of Gaza is trying to do. And the density of security is just unbelievable.
Do you think there's any willpower among people in Washington to lift that blockade? I mean, certainly at the moment, we're in the middle of a US presidential campaign and the feeling is that nothing's going to happen between now and November. But do you think, particularly if this current president is voted back in, that President Obama could be in the position to actually do something about Gaza?
Well, that would be a dream come true, but it seems quite obvious from any feedback in Washington that the biggest achievement would be some kind of a deal being broken between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, with always, Gaza put on the sidelines.
And just to remind people that, of course, the West Bank is controlled by Fatah, the arch rivals of Hamas. Now, the two have been involved in talks. Do you think they're capable of bridging their differences?
I'm quite convinced that they don't want sincerely to bridge those differences, but it is the population, especially the population of Gaza, that is putting pressure on them, because they know that this Hamas-Fatah division is the worst thing that can happen to the average Palestinian.
Now, what impact is the ongoing uncertainty in neighbouring Egypt having on Gaza at the moment?
Well, this uncertainty was a bounty for Gaza, because thanks to the uncertainty, the blockade from the Egyptian side of the border, because most of the opening is going through the Egyptian desert of Sinai, going to Cairo, has been eased. And of course, Hamas is betting a lot on its close relationship with the Muslim Brothers in Egypt in order to consolidate even more its power.
And it's betting, as you say, a lot on the Muslim Brotherhood, and certainly they do believe that if the Muslim Brotherhood's presidential candidate Mohammed Morsi was to win, that they would stand to benefit.
Yes, but at the same time, a lot of people in Gaza consider that the Muslim Brothers in Egypt could, in fact, impact Hamas in Gaza and force Hamas to be more open, more to achieve real progress in its negotiation with Fatah. Egypt is a place where the Palestinian factions are discussing, and any change in the Egyptian position is affecting the Palestinian internal dialogue.
Now, Jean-Pierre Filliou, you've been to Gaza on numerous occasions. How would you describe the spirit for the people who live there.
Oh, it's very lively, and that the best thing, and the strongest reason of hope in Gaza, because despite all the tragedies that they've been through, for the overwhelming majority of the population, resistance means living day by day with a smile, with hope, and having a family life, having some kind of normalcy, trying to forget all this uncertainty and just live. And so it's a very powerful feeling when you're in Gaza. It's a depressing place by many standards because you see the blockade, you see all that. But the people there, they are just, a fountain of joy despite everything they've been through.
Jean-Pierre Filiu, thank you so much for being with us today. And that's it for this edition of the France 24 interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly.